My parents have been alive for the last 14 months. I have not spoken to either of them once. Not because of a fight. Not because of distance. Not because of anything I did. Because a stranger got there first. And by the time I realized what was happening, he had already replaced me. In the legal documents. In their home. In their minds. I need you to understand something before we go any further. This is not a story about money. I know that is probably what you are expecting. But money is not what kept me up at night. What kept me up was something much harder to explain. This is a story about how one calculated, patient, methodical person can erase 28 years of family history in complete silence, while you are living your normal life thinking everything is perfectly fine. I am going to walk you through every single step of how it happened. Because if you have aging parents, if you love someone who is getting older, what I am about to share with you could genuinely save your family. It very nearly destroyed mine. I want you to picture a completely ordinary Tuesday night in late February. I have just made coffee. I am sitting at my kitchen table still in my work clothes, doing something I did twice a year without even thinking about it. Logging into our family's legal cloud vault. My grandfather spent 40 years building a modest but successful real estate portfolio. When he passed, that portfolio moved into a generational trust. My parents were the primary grantors. I was the secondary trustee. My job was simple. Check the records. Help with property taxes. Make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I had done this exact check probably a dozen times before. It took 30 minutes. It was genuinely boring. Except this time, I opened the master directory, and I stopped. The folder structure was different. Not slightly different. Not a cosmetic change. Completely, unrecognizably different. The folders I had navigated for years, the ones labeled with my name, my future family's funds, the individual property records, they were gone. In their place was a single master file, heavily encrypted, with a modification date of 3 weeks prior. I told myself it was a clerical error, a software update. I told myself my parents had probably asked the lawyer to reorganize things and forgot to mention it. Then I checked the file properties. The document author was not our family attorney of 30 years. It was an estate firm I had never seen or heard of in my life. My coffee went cold. I did not touch it again. I bypassed the security warning and pulled up the primary beneficiary addendum. I was still convincing myself it was a mistake, a restructuring for tax reasons, something logical with a boring explanation. I found the beneficiary section, where my name had been listed for 28 years as the sole inheritor and executor of my family's estate. There was a blank space, and sitting at the very top of a brand new irrevocable trust was a name I had never once heard spoken in my entire life. Elias Thorne. I actually said it out loud. To my empty apartment. The way you repeat a word until it stops sounding real. Elias Thorne. He was not a charity. He was not a shell company. The document was explicit. Elias Thorne, listed as a private individual, had been granted 100% executive control and sole beneficiary rights to every liquid asset, every property deed, and every family heirloom in the estate. A complete stranger was legally inheriting my family's legacy, and I had not received a single phone call. My first instinct was the financial dashboard. I needed to see what had moved and what had changed. I typed in the master password, the one my parents and I had shared for 5 years. Access denied. I checked my typing. Tried again. Access denied. Password changed 21 days ago. I pushed my chair back from the desk. That was the moment the full weight of it hit me. Because being disinherited is one thing. People get disinherited. Relationships fall apart. Wills get rewritten. It is painful, but it happens. But this was different. The password was not changed after a conversation. There was no letter, no phone call, no warning. The access I had used to help my parents pay property taxes, to flag maintenance issues on the real estate, to protect the very assets this document was now handing to a stranger. It had been quietly, deliberately, surgically removed. While I was living my normal life, someone had been methodically burning every bridge between me and my own family. I picked up my phone to call my mother. My thumb hovered over her contact photo for a long time, and then a thought crept in that I was not ready for. What if she already knows? I put the phone down. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I was sitting across from an independent estate litigation attorney. I had printed everything I could access, and I put it all on his desk. I told him I needed to know one thing. How was this legal? He took his time reading. His expression did not change. When he looked up, he said something I was not prepared to hear. This was done correctly. Every step. Out. He explained it carefully. The new attorneys had not broken the old trust. Breaking it would have been challengeable. Instead, they had exploited a specific clause that allowed my parents, as the primary grantors, to decant the trust. Think of it like pouring liquid from one container into another. The old trust becomes empty. A brand new one, with entirely new terms and entirely new beneficiaries, takes its place. And because of the way current digital privacy laws are written, there was no legal requirement to notify me. I had been removed from my own family's estate with the same legal effort it takes to update a mailing address. I sat there for a moment. Then I asked the only question that actually mattered. Then how do I fight it? He folded his hands on the desk. That, he said, is going to be complicated. I went home, and I did something obsessive, but necessary. I opened my phone, my calendar, and my call logs, and I mapped out the last 12 months of my relationship with my parents. Every text, every call, every visit attempt. What I found made me feel sick. 8 months before that Tuesday night, my parents had relocated to their secondary property, a more isolated home a few states away. It was supposed to be temporary, a winter retreat. Our weekly phone calls became bi-weekly texts, short ones. Just tired, busy with new friends. When I offered to fly out for Thanksgiving, my mother told me the floors were being refinished. Bad timing. Maybe Christmas. Then Christmas came and went with a 3-line text and a photo I had seen before. I had chalked all of it up to them wanting independence, growing older, finding their own rhythm. I respected that. I did not push. But now, looking at the timeline with everything I knew, I could see it with horrible clarity. The new estate firm was retained exactly 6 weeks after my parents arrived at that house. The password was changed 3 weeks after the new trust was signed. The distance was not my parents wanting space. It was someone creating space. Controlled, deliberate, manufactured distance, timed perfectly to keep me out of the picture while the paperwork was being arranged. The next question was obvious. How do you transfer millions of dollars in family assets without the family attorney noticing? Without witnesses? Without a single piece of paper appearing anywhere in the house? The answer was buried in the document metadata. Remote, online, notarization. In recent years, estate law has evolved to allow fully digital, legally binding signatures executed through encrypted webcam sessions and biometric confirmation. No office, no paralegal watching your face for signs of confusion or distress. No paper copies left on a counter somewhere. Elias had orchestrated the entire restructuring of my family's legacy from their living room iPad. A thumbprint, a webcam session, a notary in a different state on a screen. Done. The reason I had found nothing unusual during my previous checks was simple. There was nothing physical to find. No folders in a drawer. No second copy from the lawyer. The entire transaction existed only in encrypted digital files at a firm I had never heard of, under terms I was never meant to see. It was a transfer of generational wealth, so clean, so modern, so perfectly designed for the digital age that it left absolutely no trace in the physical world. I hired a private investigator. It took 3 weeks to get a full picture of who Elias Thorne actually was. He was not a long-lost relative. He was not a legitimate financial advisor with verifiable credentials. Online, he presented himself as a concierge longevity consultant, a term vague enough to mean anything and specific enough to sound credible to the right audience. His target demographic, according to everything the investigator found, was consistent. Wealthy aging couples, preferably ones with adult children who lived out of state. He offered wellness check-ins, estate optimization consultations, lifestyle management, the kind of soft, warm-sounding services that feel like a gift when your children are busy and you are starting to feel your age. But the investigator found a pattern. Different names in different states' civil court records. Elderly clients who had quietly changed their wills. A lawsuit from another family in another state that had been settled confidentially. He was not a con artist in the traditional sense. He did not forge signatures or steal credit cards. He was something more sophisticated, more patient, but more dangerous. He befriended people, genuinely, carefully, intimate, completely, and then he waited. There is a moment I keep coming back to. A few weeks after I hired the investigator, I was sitting on my floor surrounded by old photo albums, just sitting with them. There is one photograph I have looked at probably 100 times since all of this started. My father is kneeling next to me in our driveway. I am maybe 6 years old. He is guiding my hands on the handlebars of my first bike. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at me, and he is laughing at something I said. Completely present. Completely mine. There is another one of my mother and me moving boxes into my college dorm. She has got a piece of furniture balanced on her hip, and she is making a face at the camera, pretending it is heavier than it is. We had a running joke that day about whether my lamp was worth the effort. I can still hear her voice saying it. Elias had known my parents for less than 11 months when he was handed everything those photographs represent. Less than a year. Against 28. I say that not to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because I need you to understand the specific cruelty of what this kind of manipulation does. It does not just take your inheritance. It reaches back through time, and it contaminates the memories. You start asking yourself whether they were always capable of this, whether you ever really knew them, whether any of it was real. That is the part that breaks you, not the money, the doubt. My father had a habit. For years he used a voice memo app on his personal tablet to record his thoughts, garden plans, book ideas, occasional rambling observations about something he had seen on the news. It was one of his quirks, something I had always found quietly endearing. That tablet synced automatically to an old family cloud account, one that predated Elias's involvement entirely, one he had apparently forgotten to revoke my access to. I found a recording dated from November. I almost did not listen to it. I assumed it would be something about his garden. I pressed play. It was not my father's voice I heard first. It was Elias. Calm. Kiwi. Gentle. Kind. Warned. Warn. Kind of voice that makes you feel understood. They do not appreciate what you have built, Richard. Look how long it has been since they visited. They are not worried about you. They are waiting. You deserve to leave this legacy to someone who actually respects your vision. Someone who is here, right now. Then, I heard my mother's voice, quieter than I had ever heard her, softer, in a way that did not sound like peace. It sounded like resignation. You are right, Elias. You are the only one who truly cares about us. I have thought a lot about how to describe what I felt in that moment. I have tried to find the right word for it. The closest I can get is erasure. He had not just taken the estate. He had gone further than that. He had sat in my parents' living room, in the warmth of their trust, and he had systematically dismantled the version of me they carried in their hearts. He had taken every moment I was not there, every week I was working, every holiday I had missed, every phone call I had cut short because life was busy, and he had turned those gaps into evidence against me. He made himself the son they deserved, and he made me the reason they needed one. Armed with the recording and the investigator's findings, I hired a forensic accountant. I needed to understand the full scope before planning any kind of legal response. What she found changed the urgency of everything. The assets were not sitting quietly in the new trust, waiting for my parents to pass away. They were actively moving. Liquid funds were being shifted out of stable long-term investments into high-risk vehicles managed by LCs that traced back through several layers directly to Elias. Commercial property titles that my grandfather had spent decades acquiring were being leveraged for large lines of credit. The accountant estimated that at the current rate of extraction, the estate my grandfather built over 40 years would be functionally hollowed out within 3 to 4 years. Elias was not playing a long game. He was already cashing out, and he was doing it while my parents were still alive, almost certainly framing every move as aggressive portfolio optimization or strategic estate restructuring. Terms that sound like progress. Terms that people who trust you completely have no reason to question. The obvious move was law enforcement, adult protective services, someone with authority. I made those calls. I filed the reports. I gave them everything. The timeline, the recording, the financial transfers, the investigator's full background report on Elias. Social workers were dispatched to my parents' home. Elias answered the door. By the time the workers sat down with my parents, he had prepared them. My parents were calm, articulate, and clear. They said Elias was a cherished friend. They said they had made their estate decisions freely and with full understanding. They said their child was harassing them over a financial dispute. Because my parents were legally competent adults, which they were in every clinical and legal sense, the state had no grounds to intervene. I was standing on the outside of a glass wall. I could see exactly what was happening. I could describe it in precise detail. I had documentation, recordings, and a forensic paper trail, and I was completely, legally powerless to stop any of it. When I told my attorney I wanted to sue Elias directly, to drag the whole thing into open court and put his history in front of a judge, he turned to the final page of the new trust document and pointed to a single paragraph. The in terrorem clause, sometimes called a no contest clause. In standard estate planning, this clause simply states that if a beneficiary challenges a will, they forfeit their inheritance. A deterrent. Uncomfortable, but common. This one was different. This one stated that any family member who challenged the validity of the trust would not only be permanently disinherited, they would be held personally liable for all legal fees incurred by the trust in defending itself. Let that land for a moment. Elias had access to my family's estate, millions of dollars to fight any lawsuit I filed. I had my savings account. If I sued and lost, which was statistically likely given that the documents were airtight and my own parents would testify against me, I would not just lose the case. I would lose everything I had personally built as well. The clause was not just a defense. It was a weapon, loaded and pointed directly at me, designed by someone who had thought through every possible exit and sealed them all shut. I booked a flight without telling anyone. I am not recommending this. My attorney advised against it, but I had reached a point where the legal options felt like watching someone drown through a window while arguing about whether the ladder was up to code. I rented a car, drove to my parents' winter house, and used the gate code I still remembered from the last time I had visited over a year prior. I still had my emergency key to the front door. I walked in without knocking. The scene I walked into was so ordinary it was almost surreal. My parents were sitting in the living room, tea on the table, afternoon light coming through the windows. Elias was sitting across from them, reading. He looked up when I walked in. And here's the detail I will never forget, the one that told me everything I needed to know about exactly who he was. He was not surprised. He smiled, slowly, like someone who had already played this moment in his head and knew exactly how it ended. I think it would be best if you left, he said, before I had spoken a single word. He stood up and positioned himself between me and my parents. Casual, unhurried, deliberate. Richard and Martha do not need this kind of stress. We have spoken about this. I looked past him at my parents. I told them everything. The LCSH, the asset transfers, the recording. I told my father the exact words Elias had used in that November voice memo. They are not worried about you, Richard. They are waiting. My father's expression did not break. He stood up. And when he spoke, his voice was steady and cold in a way I had never once heard from him in my entire life. Elias handles our affairs now. You have made your priorities clear. Please respect our home. My mother did not look at me. Not once. I walked back out the door I had come in through, got in the rental car, and sat in the driveway for a few minutes. Then I drove away. I want to be careful here because this part is hard to explain without it sounding like self-pity. And I genuinely do not want your pity. I want you to understand something. When I walked out of that house, I was not just leaving behind money or property or legal rights. I was leaving behind my parents, not the versions of them that Elias had manufactured over 11 months of careful, patient conditioning. I was leaving behind the real ones, the ones in those photographs, the ones with the inside jokes and the driveway and the college dorm lamp that was not worth the effort. Those versions no longer had access to the surface. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from losing someone who is still alive. You cannot process it cleanly. There is no closure available because the door is still technically open. They are still there, still breathing, still drinking their afternoon tea. But you cannot reach them. The person you knew is behind glass, and the stranger who put them there is holding the only key. My grandfather spent 40 years building something. My parents spent their lives protecting it. And in 11 months, one carefully constructed predator had consumed most of it, and buried the rest in legal protection so thorough that even the people being robbed would defend him. That is the part that keeps me awake. Not what I lost, what he is still doing to them. I am not going to give you a list of steps. You do not need a checklist right now. You need to understand one thing. The conditions that allowed this to happen are not rare. They are not exotic. They exist in thousands of families right now, today. Aging parents, busy adult children, the quiet accumulation of small distances that nobody names until it is too late. The predators who exploit those conditions have evolved. They do not look like criminals. They look like solutions. They arrive at exactly the moment your parents are feeling most overlooked, most invisible, most quietly convinced that their best years are behind them, and they make them feel seen. It is not stupidity that makes people vulnerable to this. It is loneliness, and loneliness can happen to anyone. So, here is what I am asking you to do. Not for me, for your own family. Call your parents this week. Not a text, a call. Ask about their friends, the new ones especially. Ask how they met. Ask what they do together. If you are listed on any family trust, confirm in writing that any major structural change requires dual authorization and advance notice to all trustees. If your parents use a digital estate service, verify your access is still active. Right now. Not after the holidays. And if something feels wrong, if the calls get shorter, if the visits get deflected, if there is suddenly a new person managing the schedule of someone you love, do not tell yourself it is nothing. It might be nothing. But I told myself that for 8 months. And by the time I stopped, the document was already signed. I do not know how this ends yet. The legal process is ongoing. The forensic evidence is still being compiled. There may be a path forward, but it is long and expensive and uncertain. What I do know is that I would rather 1,000 people watch this and have one uncomfortable conversation with their parents this week than have one more family go through what mine is going through right now. If any part of this felt familiar to you, please share it. Not for the views, because the person you share it with might need it far more than either of us realizes.